Hello everyone, welcome to Soul Color Studio, and today's video is going to be a little bit different from what I've done on this channel, but hey, this channel is sort of an ode to all my creative abilities and the things that I like to craft and make. So we're going to do a 1888 Victorian riding corset in today's video. So this is by no means a tutorial, but if anyone's, wanted to find an 1888 Victorian corset video out there, at least showing some sense of the construction or how it's created, then this is probably going to be the video for you. I must warn you though, some of my clips have bad lighting because I am a night owl and I like to work at night, and I do not have like a large studio space anymore, or not that I ever did. I'm working in my bedroom and often have very poor lighting, but you can still sort of make out what's sort of happening. So this particular design is not my design entirely. It's by Aranya Black, and she used to be like the bee's knees when it came to making corsets, and unfortunately she has closed down her YouTube channel and her website, so she's no longer available. But if you want some of the designs, it is floating around somewhere on Reddit. If you try and type it in, you might find it, like how I did. And I made a few alterations to her design just to suit what it is I wanted. And it was the closest sort of design that I could find that matched what I wanted to make without me having to go back to square one and learn how to make a complete corset pattern on my own and all that jazz, because I was on a bit of a time crunch this month. So without further ado, here's the corset making. So this is the fabric that I chose to use. This is an army or olive green cotton twill. And I tend to go for the more natural fibers because cotton is much more breathable than the synthetic fabrics. And this is a deconstructed top from a previous outfit that I had that someone gave to me that I never used. So I decided to carefully dismantle it and use it for the corset. And it is absolutely stunning. I love this pale gold details and prints on against this emerald green or hunter's green background. It also came with a green lining that I used, which you will see later on, to make the bust gauze and the dark green details of this piece. So right now I just have everything laid out, and I'm going to put a line straight down the middle because I want to be able to preserve this pattern so that the piece sort of looks coherent, because we can't have a mismatched pattern. That would look so awful. And I'm just placing the back and front pieces just to get them neatly aligned. And I'm using my crystals as paperweights because I don't really have anything else, but they're a big help and they're also very pretty. And I'm going to go around with chalk to go ahead and line this pattern out onto the fabric. And once I'm done with that, I'll add my seam allowances and cut them out like so. So I know I'm supposed to be using a cutting mat, but unfortunately I don't have one. And I know the blade is probably going to get pretty messed up, but it's okay. I'll get another blade. So right a bit here, I cut a little bit off the line, just a few moles, which is a little bit dangerous because I technically only want 1 centimeter of seam allowance on that edge, as you can see. But it's okay, it works out in the end. So my seam allowances are normally 1.5 centimeters, which is 15 millimeters, around all the other edges except for that one center front. Yes, center front of the pattern. And that's purely because I needed to keep that print. So here I am aligning the back piece to get it nice and, I don't know, sorted on the pattern. And again, I'm only going to leave 1 centimeter of seam allowance on the center back. And I'm just outlining everything with chalk. So these patterns that I have don't have seam allowance on them. So it's up to me to actually add it on. And I much prefer doing it that way because that way, if I want to change a seam allowance and add a little bit of extra, then I could. So I had a huge problem with sort of drawing it on. The chalk was kind of bulky and not very neat, so the lines didn't come up very neat, but I still managed. And I went ahead and bought these pens, which you will see me suffering with almost throughout the entire video from Temu. So maybe that's why they weren't that great. They were very cheap, and they were supposed to be these heat erasable pens, but they were just erasing on their own within 5 seconds. So they are very magical. I would say they're magically disappointing, actually. So I'm just cutting the other back piece out. So here is the other fabric that I was telling you about, which was the lining of the outfit, and I cut the gauze out. And now I'm just cutting interfacing. So I've used interfacing for most of the silky fabrics, which is the fashion fabric, as people call it, for the bust gauze and for the back and front pieces. Just because I wanted something with a little bit more weight and a little bit more structure, the silky fabrics were very, very thin. So I'm only showing you guys me cutting out the back pieces, but just trust me, I did it for all the pieces. And I just used bit of my tarot cards as well as a weight because I don't know, I didn't really have paper weights. And I'm just going to demonstrate to you guys how I actually uh, fused the interfacing onto the fashion fabric. And don't do what I did and just go straight in with the iron. I would suggest putting something over just so that see there how it caught. So yeah, to avoid that, we're going to put something over. I was just lazy and I didn't want to do that. So I went ahead and just went straight in with the iron. And it helps a great deal for you guys to press this thing in instead of, you'll see me do that now, instead of swiping, but I also did a bit of swiping action just to get the heat to fuse the interfacing onto the fabric. So you can see it just has a little bit more weight, a little bit more structure, which is going to be perfect for us making our corset. So now on the front piece, I'm just going to notch out this curved seam and then fold the seam allowance underneath on both fabrics just to make like a sandwich and give it a good press with the iron. The notches help a great deal, as you can see. So here's the sandwich, and then we have a front gore piece that's going to go in between like this, and we're going to go ahead and sew as close to the edge as possible. I did forget to mention as well that I also cut out the pieces on the cotton twill. Unfortunately, I didn't have any footage to add of that, but just trust me, you'll see as we begin to sew. And bear in mind, I'm a little bit of a slow sewer, so even though I sped up the video, you can only imagine how slow it was in real life. But I'm new to sewing, and I would just prefer to just be careful and take my time so I don't make any mistakes. And there you have it. So this is what it ends up looking like. And up next, we are going to sew in these darts for the front panels. But before we do that, I'm just going to baste stitch the fabric together, just so that when I sew the darts, it's not moving around. And to sew the front panel darts, I'm going to hand stitch it first before I run through the machine. And I'm just doing, I think it's called a basic whip stitch, following the lines, the white lines that I've scribed with the horrible chalk that was very uncomfortable to use. And you guys can just see how I'm sewing that in just to keep it insecure. Okay, so I went ahead and did that for both the bust or the front darts. Actually, they're not bust darts, my bad. They are front darts, and as you can see, this is how it looks on the other side. And now I'm just going to go over it with the machine just to get a nice clean stitch. So there you have it. So this is how the front panels end up looking. And next up, we are going to sew the front and the back panels together. And I'm going to use a sort of sandwiching method that you're going to see. And I'm going to put one piece at the back and one piece at the front, and we're going to flip it over. So I'm not very good at explaining this part, but if you just watch the video, you'll get a good idea of what exactly it is I mean. And I'm going to pin this in real nice. And honestly, guys, this took very long to do. So yes, you are seeing a sped up version, but let me tell you, sewing takes a while. And I would rather have it that way, like I said, just to get everything nice and accurate. I would rather do this like maybe once or twice over just to make sure everything is nice and pin and straight, just so we don't end up fucking up our literal only piece of fabric. Because we cannot do this again. I only had one piece of that deconstructed top. So I'm just pinning it in really nice and tight. And I'm going to go and give it a nice stitch. It's a 1.5 centimeter, 15 millimeter seam allowance. Yeah, my machine's pretty old, so this is not going to go very quick for me, even though I've sped it up for you guys. I'm just going in real nice and slow. And there you have the magically disappointing pen that keeps disappearing. I swear to God, there's no heat in my room. I'm not ironing over it. I'm not having a heater or an air conditioning on, and it just doesn't work as well as it should. And the ink just seems to disappear whether I apply heat or not. And this is what it actually looks like. So you're going to see me flip this over and show you how this wonderful sandwich seam kind of works. It hides the middle seam in. And right here, I'm going to put a boning channel on the side seam. And the seam allowance is actually going to be the boning channel and create the pocket for the bones to go in. So now I'm just sewing it in, and in case you're wondering why I have tape, it's because, yes, the magic or magically disappointing pens don't work, and I can't really see the chalk with all of the detail on the fabric and the gold pattern, so I just put tape to get a nice and steady seam line. Because like I said, I'm new to sewing, and I think I've said that like 3 times now. I'm so sorry, but it's better you guys know that I'm not a professional. So I may not make the best decisions, but it did come out quite well, which you guys will see in the end. And I'm just massaging the fabric and keeping everything together because as you can see, this is a little bit of an awkward turn, and I don't want the fabric to get bunched up or scrunched up in an uncomfortable way that's going to look really ugly. And the next thing we're going to do now is actually cut out these little triangle pieces where the bust gauze are going to go. So this is bust gore number 1, and the other is bust gore number 2. And I've pinned the fabric in place just so it's not going to move around, so we get a nice, clean, even cut. And then I'm going to add some of the binding strip that I made with the lining fabric of the outfit that I told you I used for the bust gauze. And I'm going to baste this by hand in place first, just so it's easier to sew. I wouldn't want it to sort of move around, and the fabric is honestly very silky and it's very delicate, so I much prefer just to do the extra step of hand basting things in place. And I absolutely love these little quilting clips. Like sometimes they're much better than the pins. They just hold everything much flatter than sometimes pinning in something, and it gives that little bump. So right about here, I have a little bit of a struggle to just get that corner right, but because the fabric is so thin and delicate, it wasn't really that difficult, but it's kind of awkward and it didn't look too untidy. So once that's done, I'm going to clip in or clip out that extra piece of binding strip. And then now I'm going to sort out the bust gore. So I'm just folding in the cotton twill fabric. I'm folding it on that white seam line that I have, just so that when I sew this onto the front panel, you're not going to see any raw edges. So this is why I folded it in. Of course, ironing helps a great deal when you're folding it in because the cotton twill is quite thick. And then I'm cutting the extra fabric as well, just so I don't have an even thicker situation to work with. And I'm also going to go ahead and hand stitch these and baste them in so they don't move around when I'm sewing. So this, I think, probably took the longest of the entire outfit because it was so tedious. I think I had probably like 8 of these to sew, which is all of them in total. And yeah, it took about maybe an hour just to get everything done. But like I said in the beginning of the video, that's what sewing is. I mean, the videos are sped up, but it actually takes a really kind of long time. So there it is. Now we're gonna pin this in place. I'm just going ahead and remarking my lines. And now we're gonna sew that in. But before we do, I'm just showing you guys how I folded that binding strip in half and went over it with an iron just to get it nice and neat before we applied it into our bust gauze. And here you can see I'm just doing the same process I did before, and you're going to get to see at the end how I actually sewed this in. And there's a visit from Kitty. So like we did before, I'm hand stitching this in. Yeah, it takes a while, but it's a much better result. And so something I didn't show you guys in the previous footage is that after I pinned the bust gore onto the front panel, I then went and stitched this also in by hand just to hold it in. So simple basting stitches, nothing too crazy, so that when I sew it down, it didn't actually move because I made the mistake of not doing this before, and I noticed that the presser foot was actually pushing out the fabric a bit, and it wasn't coming out very great. Lucky I only did one like that, so I kind of learned from that experience. And now I'm going to just sew it in. I did have a bit of trouble going around the corner. I just think that my machine is really old. So I think it's about a 40-year-old machine, guys. I think it's from the 80s, but I got it on a good deal at a secondhand shop. So it's gonna do what it's gonna do. Um, and it basically doesn't have a speed level where you can go very, very slow, but it's either going very nothing or very fast. And so I had a problem with that. So it was difficult to get control around the corners where I needed to go very slowly. But nevertheless, I think I kind of managed. So this is one half of the corset piece done. I still have to put a front bust piece here. And this is the front bust gauze up close and personal. This is the side gore, the front and the back. And I also have to get eyelets in here in the side, center back. So now I'm going to sew in the busk, and I put in a piece of the cotton twill just to sort of create a seam and fold over. I'm just going to sew it on that white line that you guys saw on that piece. I think I may have cut these pieces a bit too narrow, so you will see me have a bit of trouble with that in the upcoming clips. Okay, so now I've just got to give this a good iron because it's always good to press our seams after we sew them, just so that they're nice and crisp. And I've got to fold that over. And this is going to basically be like a channel to put my busk piece in. And I also have to leave another channel strip to kind of fit in a boning, so almost like a boning channel and a busk piece channel. And then I'm measuring out the holes of the busk piece. And I went ahead and made them in the fabric using a incense stick, which I do not recommend, but it kind of worked for me. And I'm pushing the busk through the holes. And we have to sew it down as close as possible to the edge. I'm hand basting in this stitch because I don't actually have a zipper foot, or I think it's called an invisible zipper foot, to get as close to the busk as possible. And since I only have one needle in my 80s machine, I didn't want to risk breaking it. So I just went ahead and hand stitched everything with a simple basic. And I tried to keep a neat straight stitch. Okay, so here I'm just trying to fold over and get a boning channel. And the reason why I'm trying to fold it in is because I don't want any raw edges. So I want this as neat as possible. So here's what I mean when I said that I think I might have made this a bit too narrow, because I really struggled to get a nice fold over to make a good stitch and a good boning channel. It's time to give that a stitch on the machine. So I tried to stitch as close to the edge as possible because I was running out of space in the boning channel. But luckily, I just made it to actually fit in a 6mm bone, even though I used a general 8mm bone throughout the rest of the corset. And there it is. Up next, I'm going to sew the center back channel for the boning and the eyelets and fold it over. But before we do that, I just want to show you this handy little thing that I got from Temu as well. It is a bias tape maker, and honestly, it's very, very handy. At first, I kind of struggled on how to kind of work it, but you know, nothing one quick YouTube video didn't fix. And then I kind of figured out my own way, and I used it as I was sort of comfortable. And this is the biggest size I'm using. I think it's a number 25. I got a 5-pack or a 4-pack, was it? Oh, well, it comes in 5 or 4, and it comes in a different range of sizes. So I'm just folding this fabric in. It's cotton twill as well for the boning channel. And I'm using this bias tape maker, yeah, just to make my life a whole lot more easier. I'm just sort of measuring out where the boning channels would go. And this boning channel that I'm putting in now is going to be on the front piece, as you can see on the screen. So I kind of did my own thing with the boning channels. I didn't follow the original Aranya black design. I did what was comfortable, but there's nothing wrong with following the pattern that she has already created. I'm just marking the center of my boning channel because that's where I'm going to start making a stitch before I stitch on either side. This just helps it to keep it in place and not shift around. So you guys might have seen that I already had one half of the corset finished. And so I'm working on the second and the last half of the corset. And I was really surprised at how smooth the second round kind of went because the first round was very slow and tedious. And like I mentioned before, since I'm new to sewing, this is my first time using a sewing machine, and I just found things to be very kind of precautious during the first half of this corset. So during the second half, everything was much easier because I think I had a better idea of what I was doing and how to do it. Now I'm just marking out and I'm going to add the boning channel on the back as you can see on the screen. But before I secure that, I need to finally get to that back piece or the center back. I'm adding in the strip which is going to be the boning channels and the channel for the eyelet. So there's two boning channels, one on either side, and in between that is going to be the row of eyelets. I'm giving that a good iron because as you know, it's good to iron our seams and folding it over. And this fabric actually wasn't cut too narrow. It was wide enough so that my boning channels were 8 millimeter and I didn't have a problem. Thank God. And then I'm just marking in equal spaces. So that white pencil just totally saved my life. It's actually a fine art charcoal pencil, but it did wonders for the fabric. And there's my kitty again. She gets the 5 o'clock zoomies, so as you know, it must be 5 o'clock in the video then. So now I'm adding that little piece of deboning channel in the back. And the reason why I wanted to add it in now is because I want to get one side of it, or at least the corner towards the edge of the center back to be hidden underneath the center back. So you'll see it like that. I'm pinning it in place so it doesn't move around. Drawing in the lines to sew, just so I can help me get everything nice and straight. So you see me going over and over again with that pen because it is absolutely useless. And now I'm going to sew it down. Okay, so the pen is not totally useless. I think that if I were working with lighter colored fabrics, then it might be, but for darker color fabrics, it's definitely a problem. And the white doesn't work at all, even though they say to give it a few minutes, or that it works on only black or dark leather. I don't really see that happening. I'm just trimming off the excess fabric so it doesn't create a lot of bulk. Putting it back in place, and now you can see how that end of that boning channel is concealed quite neatly under that strip. So as usual, I'm drawing in a center line of that boning channel. And we always start with a center line just because it helps things to keep in place before we actually sew either side. And we're going to get 2 boning channels. I'm marking out another boning channel to go on the back panel. It's going to be 2 bones, so 1 boning channel makes 2 channels, basically. I'm just pinning this in, and I'm going to sew it in just like I sewed the other channels, going down the center first and then on either side. Now I'm doing the front busk on the last panel, and I'm pinning it down. And by the way, the seam allowance I used on this is actually 5 millimeters because I wanted to preserve the pattern as much as possible. I'm marking out where the loops of the bust go. And for this particular busk, I'm only going to sew in between those marks that I just made because we have to have a hole for the busk loops or loop holders or whatever you call them to go through the fabric and basically just stick out. So since this actually won't be seen, I was actually just using a basic ballpoint pen because at that point I just was ready to throw those magic heat erasable disappointment pens in the bin. I'm just going to give this a quick iron to make sure everything is nice and flat. So you can already see that that piece is looking a bit narrow. And I'm cutting out a little bit of that extra seam allowance just so that when we fold it over, it's not going to create a lot of bulk. I'm just ironing down that seam allowance again just to make it nice and flat. And I'm poking through that busk piece through the holes or the gaps that we left. So this is why we left the gaps, obviously. And since that's looking good, I'm going to sew a seam right next to it as close as possible. And we're going to do a hand stitch with this one again. Like I said previously, that I don't have the correct presser foot to go as close to the busk as possible, so I rather not risk my needles. And since everything works fine with the busk, with the little test that I just did, I am ready to hand stitch this in. So I kind of realized that even though I have a machine, if you are making garments for yourself, and there's a little visit from Kitty again, you are going to do some hand stitching like somewhere. It's always inevitable. And honestly, I think hand stitching can be a little therapeutic. It's kind of calming and relaxing. However, it can also be quite tedious, especially if you're tired and you just want to get it over and done with. Okay, so here I'm contemplating folding in that boning channel, but it's not working, obviously. So I actually end up just doing a zigzag stitch, which you can see here on the edge, just to get that raw edges neat, so it's not going to fray or look untidy. And then I'm going to sew it straight down to make that boning channel. And for this particular side of the corset, I think I managed to get an 8 millimeter boning channel in. And I just forgot to actually sew down one of the boning channels in the front panel, so I'm just doing that now. So there you have it. And these are the two pieces together. So I'm going to cut the bones. The black boning is going to be the 8 millimeter bone. And I'm just redrawing the seam allowance line with the nasty heat erasable magic disappointment pens and measuring out my boning channels and cutting them. So I cut them a bit like a triangle or like a circle around the edges, and I burn them just so that they're not sharp. And because it's plastic, you can just squeeze with your fingers and it gets a really blunt edge. And now I'm inserting the bones into the channels. So the reason why I'm remarking that seam allowance at the end is because I'm going to leave the boning channels about a centimeter away from that seam, just so that when I sew, I don't hit those bones and break the needle or damage the outfit. So the white boning is the 6 millimeter, and it just manages to fit into that boning channel next to the bust, the one that we had a bit of an issue with. So this wasn't as easy as it looked, guys. Like, even though the boning channels weren't particularly tight or loose, it was just a bit difficult to kind of get the bones in there. So it did take a while. I mean, yes, the video is sped up, so you guys are lucky you're not spending like an hour putting bones into it. Unless, of course, you want to make your own corset, then be my guest. But yeah, so this is what it looks like when the boning channels are in. It still has to be kind of molded and stretched out to fit my body. So when I put that on, the boning channels are just going to bend accordingly. But I love how it's coming out so far, and I think it's looking so pretty. So now I'm just measuring out the eyelets. And I think I made them around 2.5 centimeters apart and 2 centimeters for the ones in the center. So I had these gold eyelets. But they're actually for shoes, but it doesn't really matter. I was on a budget and I just used whatever I had on hand. Okay, so here I'm using the incense stick to burn the holes. So this may have seemed like a great idea, but it is a little tedious and it took quite a while. I tried not to burn the fabric too much because I obviously didn't want to ruin it, but the incense stick kept kind of going off, so I had to relight it a number of times. What I like about doing this as well is that it kind of burns the fabric around so that it doesn't fray, but I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I didn't have it all, and I didn't want to cut it with my scissors, but I did use my scissors to open the hole a bit more. And I'm just pressing in my eyelets. And by the way, my hand was hurting when I was doing that. So this is the eyelets in the end. So you can see some of them are closer and some of them are further apart. And this is basically what it's ending up looking like. So I bought this also from Temu. It is a 6 millimeter velvet ribbon. And this is going to be basically what I'm going to use to tie the corset up in the back. And I'm measuring out 3 meters, or I think about 3 yards for my American friends. And I'm just threading it through the eyelets. Now, I didn't get footage of the whole system of me doing this because my camera died, but you get the idea. So there it is. This is what it looks like when the string is in, or the velvet ribbon. So now I'm just going in and zigzag stitching the edge of the corset. So I think this is the top edge with the bust gauze. And so this is just to make it neat because I'm actually going to fold this in once and not twice. So I won't be able to fold it in twice because I don't want bulkiness, because this fabric is already thick with like 3 layers of fabric. So that is the cotton twill, which is thick on itself. It's the fashion fabric, and it is also the interfacing. So I just used my lovely little quilting kits that I also got from Temu for a very good price. Wasn't a fan of Temu initially, and I don't think that I fully am, but I mean, they have their place. So here I am trying to put something at the edge of the presser foot just to sort of get it to sew through because the fabric is so thick, and it's not working, guys. It's not working, but eventually I do kind of make it through the first, couple of centimeters, and everything goes kind of okay after that. But because this fabric is so thick, I think the presser foot was struggling to kind of feed it through. I think a walking foot would have been much better when doing this, but unfortunately, I only had one presser foot, which is the one that came with the machine, so I did what I had to. So there it is. It's just folded down once over, and that is the top of the corset. So the reason why I didn't put a binding strip here is because I'm going to put a lace later on, so there's really no need. And this is the beautiful gold lace also that I got from Temu, and it just managed to be enough for this corset. I'm going to cut it in half because it's going to go one piece on either side. And I'm burning the edges just so that they don't stray. I mean, most of these fabrics or laces that come really cheaply are basically plastic. So I'm pinning this into place, and I don't think you guys can see in the video, but I really wanted to stretch this out as I was pinning it. And the reason why is because when you do that, it kind of buckles at the top. So it folds over just to add a little bit of a bust coverage, because I did alter this design to have a higher bust level than the initial pattern, because I just felt like I wanted an over bust instead of a mid bust, which I think the original pattern was a mid bust. So you can see that the lace kind of flops over, it kind of bends over. And I just wanted to make sure as well that I had enough because I just made it with this length of ribbon. Oh, sorry, or lace ribbon, whatever it is you want to call it. And after I ended up pinning this in, I went ahead and hand stitched it because the fabric was way too thick to go under the machine. And I just thought, hand stitching it in at certain points might have just been a bit neater. And honestly, you can't even see it. I used a white thread because I didn't have any gold thread, but it still turned out absolutely amazing. So once again, guys, hand stitching, it's going really slow. I sped the video up, but I think it might have taken me like 20 minutes per stitch, per an end at least. So the last thing I'm going to do, which I didn't completely record, was sew the binding strips at the end. This is the final product. I must say I absolutely love this corset. I didn't expect it to come out this good, to be honest, since this is my first time using a machine. I haven't sewed anything in years, and I've never done a corset before. I do wish that I might have changed a few things, like the back. I could have added a little more inches to it so that I would get maybe a closer fit when I cinched it in. But other than that, I think it's really pretty. And I absolutely love this green and this gold detail. This pale gold is absolutely beautiful. That's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye!